Hello, my name is Fallon, and I am the coordinator of the Berry, Calhoun, Kalamazoo Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or VCK SISMA. My goal is to combat the threat of invasive species in that Tri-County area. Since there are so many invasive species, the backgrounds of my slides are invasive species I will not be able to fully cover. This first being emerald ash borer. You may not see the bug very often, but I'm sure you have seen the damage it has caused to our ash trees. This is autumn olive. An invasive species is a two-part definition. The organism has to be both non-native and cause harm to the environment, the economy, human health, or normally a combination of the three. For example, there are many varieties of apple trees that are not native, but they do not cause harm and we like having them. On the other hand, poison ivy, as many of you know, grows aggressively and can cause harm, but it is a native species, so it would not be considered an invasive. So, Orion or bittersweet is not native and can take out our native species. It checks both boxes and is considered an invasive. This is spotted lanternfly. For the purpose of definitions, a weed is simply a plant somewhere you do not want it, making any plant eligible to be considered a weed. This is common buckthorn. Most often the reason for the spread of invasive species is us, humans. It can be either accidentally or sometimes purposely moving the plant and not knowing it was an invasive, and very rarely moving it and knowing. This is glossy buckthorn. The most common areas to find invasive species are in gardens or lawns because they were planted as ornamentals, in trails and road right-of-ways, construction sites, and ditches because they were moved by gear and equipment. This is purple loosestrife. Invasive species have common characteristics that allow them to outcompete our native species. They grow quickly, normally starting growth earlier in the spring and continue growing later into the fall than our native species. They're able to tolerate a wide variety of conditions, such as soil, moisture level, and sun. They have no natural predator or competitor like they would in their native environment, and they reproduce prolifically by either having a great amount of seeds or being able to spread effectively and frequently. This is the Asian longhorn beetle. Here is a list of invasives that are super common to this Tri-County area. And here is a list of invasives to keep an eye out for. A few have been found in Michigan at low numbers, and others have not yet been reported in Michigan. This is a tree infected with hemlock woolly adelgid. The adelgid itself is tiny, but it leaves a white cotton-looking mass that you see in this picture. The Nature Conservancy estimated more than 1.4 trillion in damage from invasive species worldwide. This statistic is a few years old now, so I'm sure that that number would be even higher today. Now I will go more in depth with a few species, starting with giant hogweed. Native to Asia, it was brought over in the 1900s as an ornamental for an arboretum. There, we thought it would stay contained, but somehow it did escape into the wild. Now, giant hogweed is called giant for a reason. It can reach heights of 15 feet tall, and you can see some grown men standing next to the plant there. Its leaves alternate on the stem, and they are both compound and lobed. The flower head of giant hogweed is considered a compound umbel, meaning these little groups of flowers all come together to form this big massive group of flowers, and together they kind of have this umbrella shape. The stem has coarse hairs and purple blotches, and as you can see in this picture, the hairs become a little bit more dense around the node, and the purple blotches are more dense towards the base of the stem. The oils from giant hogweed can cause photodermatitis, making the skin extremely sensitive to ultraviolet light and causing burns, which can form up to 48 hours after contact. And if the oils are in contact with your eyes, it can cause temporary or permanent blindness. There are a few species that are commonly confused with giant hogweed, the first being cow's parsnip. However, cow's parsnip only reaches heights of 7 feet tall, so tall, but you can see with the picture of the woman, not as tall as the picture with the two men earlier in the slideshow. The flowers are flat-topped compared to the more umbrella shape in the hogweed. The hairs on the stems are much softer, and there are no purple blotches on the stems. Another lookalike is Angelica. This one reaches heights of 9 feet tall. The stems are entirely purple instead of being blotchy. The flower heads are spherical, so they form these little separate balls instead of all converging together at the top. And the leaves are more like a normal compound leaf, so they do not have the lobes. The final lookalike for giant hogweed is poison hemlock. This one also reaches heights of 9 feet tall. The stems have the purple blotches, but they do not have any hairs. The flowers are the umbels, but they are much, much smaller, and the leaves look more like that of a fern leaf. There is not yet a set management strategy for giant hogweed, but we do know that mowing stimulates budding from the rootstock. Some have had good results by digging out the entire root mass, but you need to be careful to dig out the whole thing as to not stimulate growth, just like mowing would. Others have had good success with a foliar chemical spray. Removing the flower and seed head would just limit dispersal, and you would get the same plants the next year. Next is Chinese yam. Native to China, this vine was brought over in the 1800s as an ornamental. Its leaves are fiddle-shaped and grow directly across from each other on the stem. Chinese yam has strong parallel veins. So instead of coming from a central point and branching off, they all come from that middle point and go straight down. It is difficult to find a good picture of the flowers. At the sites I have been to, I've never observed the flowers growing, but Chinese yam does produce small bell-shaped flowers that are arranged in spikes at the end of its branches. Its tuberous roots are very large and can be eaten. In fact, if you Google Chinese yam, pictures like this bottom one and other cooking pictures are way more prevalent than ones of the leaves and other identification skills for invasives. Chinese yam produces these aerial bulbils or tubers, or also known as air potatoes. These are not seeds, but when dropped, they become the roots of a new plant. This is a picture from a local site of Chinese yam. You can see it both in the front foreground or twining around some branches, but then you can also, if you look really closely, see it in the background climbing up some other trees. This is that same site climbing up a tree, and then what is leaning against that house is a ladder, which so very easily take over any kind of vegetation around it. The list of lookalike species for Chinese yam is long. First being wild yam. It still has the parallel veins, but the leaves are strongly heart-shaped, and they have short hairs on their lower surface. Wild yam also does not grow the air potatoes. Next is green burrs. This is a family of vines with parallel veins, but the leaves are oval to shallow heart-shaped, and the flowers are umbels. Again, this family of species does not produce air potatoes. Wild potato, or native morning glories, have heart to arrow-shaped leaves, and the veins are from a central mid-vein instead of having the parallel veins. The flowers are large and showy, and again, no air potatoes. Next is the bindweed family. These have a similar shaped leaf, but the veins are from a central mid-vein. The flowers are large and showy, and again, no air potatoes. The last lookalike for Chinese yam is false buckwheat. The leaves are more arrow-shaped, and the veins are from a central mid-vein. The fruits are very small, but as you might have guessed by now, no air potatoes. Cutting and mowing Chinese yam will control spread because you are not allowing the air potatoes or the seeds to grow, but the plant will continue to grow back until those massive roots are exhausted. Other management involves chemical foliar spray. This is swallowwort. There are two kinds of swallowwort, black and pale. The black has dark purple flowers and is native to the Mediterranean. The pale has light pink flowers and is native to the Ukraine. They were both brought over as an ornamental in the 1800s. Swallowwort is a vine with leaves that grow opposite each other. The leaves come to a pointed tip and have a smooth, waxy coating. Both swallowworts have seed pods that release wind-dispersed seeds, much like that of milkweed seed pods. Swallowworts are toxic to the monarch butterfly. It is not clear how often they lay their eggs on swallowwort, but when they do, the caterpillars will die after feeding. The roots of swallowwort contain a chemical that is toxic to livestock when ingested. And, like other invasive vines, swallowwort will choke out all nearby vegetation. Here is two examples of swallowwort doing just that in a forest. Here is a close-up on how many seed pods can form on swallowwort. Milkweed is mentioned as a lookalike to swallowwort because of the seed pod and monarch connection. However, other than that, there is not much confusion between the two. Milkweed's flowers are clustered together, its leaves do not have as waxy of a coating, and even the seed pods are different, with milkweeds having a much larger seed pod shape. Another potential lookalike is the dogbanes. The seed pods are similar, being long and skinny, but dogbane is not a vine, and the flowers are bell-shaped. Digging out swallowwort is only effective if the entire root crown is removed. Otherwise, it will stimulate regrowth, which is what happens with cutting and mowing techniques. Seed pod removal will reduce spread, but it is nothing to the existing populations, so next year they will grow back exactly the same. Other management techniques involve a chemical foliar spray. This is invasive Phragmites, also called common reed. It is native to Europe. The first infestation in the United States was on the East Coast in the late 1700s. It is a restricted species in Michigan. This means it is illegal to buy, sell, or move Phragmites. Phragmites has a dense, fluffy seed head that is purple in the spring. In the fall, the seed head then turns straw-colored, followed by the leaves and the stems of the plant. They then remain standing like that over winter. I've not seen a site quite as tall in this area, but in areas like the Saginaw Bay, the stalks reach heights of over 15 feet tall. When you pull back Phragmites leaves, you will see small hairs on the ligule. This is important to remember later during the lookalike species. Phragmites spreads via horizontal rhizomes. So, as you see in the picture, each one standing next to each other is connected to the neighbor underground. They also spread by seed. At first, we thought the seeds were not viable, but we now know the seeds are about 30% viable. And with over 2,000 seeds on each seed head, that 30% really starts to add up. There was a study with Grand Valley showing that Phragmites decreases property values. It blocks views, water recreation, and sites at road intersections. Phragmites crowds out native plants, and all the dead material left standing in the winter can cause a high heat and intense burn. Here you see Phragmites between a cornfield and the road right-of-way. This is supposed to be a boardwalk to a waterfront view. It can be hard to see, but there is a person standing on this boardwalk. This is the same boardwalk that the person was standing on before and after 2 years of management. There is a native species of Phragmites that does not grow as aggressively. They have reddish stems at the base, which is not present in invasive Phragmites. This is a native stand. You can see that the stalks are not as close together, the seed heads are not as dense, and the stand itself is not as high as the pictures of invasive Phragmites. I always like to think that natives just don't look as healthy as invasive Phragmites stands. However, there is a growing concern that natives are going to hybrid with invasives if they aren't currently already. Another lookalike is reed canary grass, which is also an invasive. Reed canary grass does not grow anywhere near as tall, but in the spring the two grasses look similar. To tell them apart, you pull back the leaf and you will see a plastic-looking sheath on the ligule instead of the little hairs that we discussed earlier. Especially in the Great Lakes area, there is a lot of research going on about the management of Phragmites. Cutting, mowing, and burning only show top die-off and the same regrowth the following year. It is a grass, so it actually kind of likes those efforts. However, those efforts are beneficial after a chemical spray to remove the dead biomass. Digging is also very complicated because the roots go down just as far as the plant grows high, so that's really far to dig down. Phragmites tends to respond to chemical treatment, but there is a number of ways to go about it. And the best time of year for Phragmites treatment is closer to the fall. This is because with such a massive root system, you want the chemical to go down to the roots. If you spray in the spring, you normally just see top die off. The final one I will go in depth on is Japanese knotweed. It is from Japan. It was brought over as an ornamental in the 1800s. Even today, people still seem to like it in their yards because it can make a great natural fence with how tall and thick it grows. It is prohibited in Michigan, so it is illegal to buy, sell, or move Japanese knotweed. The leaves alternate on the stems, which form a zigzag pattern. The stems are hollow with a thick node, giving it a bamboo-like appearance. In fact, Japanese knotweed is commonly called Michigan bamboo, or sometimes just weird bamboo. Its leaves are flat at the base and pointed at the tips. Tiny white flowers form in a spike. Japanese knotweed is the first to come up after a volcano. So, it has no problem growing through concrete and road right-of-ways, or even housing foundations. This one and this one are both sites in Michigan where knotweed was growing through somebody's house. This is an abandoned building that knotweed is taking over. I didn't take this picture, so who knows what was there, but I'm sure it was just a small piece that decided to grow. Maybe from somebody parking their car there that knotweed was on. More just coming up through the foundation. In the UK, they have such a huge problem with it in housing that you can't sell your house with knotweed on the property. This picture sometimes can be slightly difficult to see, but when you mow knotweed, it only takes a piece the size of your fingernail for it to regrow. So in this picture, you see a large stand back by the building, and somebody must have mowed that and then the entire lawn. So now you see little bits of knotweed respringing from everywhere in the grass. And soon this whole lot will just be a massive Japanese knotweed stand. This is it growing along the road right of way. Big problem with just a mower coming down and mowing everything, and it just spreads down the street. Same concept with a river. Little pieces will break off and float down the river and just keep spreading down, down, down. I find this picture to be really interesting because it is Phragmites and knotweed growing right next to each other. I think it'd be cool to see which one would outcompete each other, or would they just stay stagnant because they're both so aggressive. There are other species of knotweed. I will go over the differences, but all are invasive, so there's no true need to tell the difference, and many managers just consider them all Japanese knotweed. But the first one is giant knotweed, because the leaves are much larger. They are heart-shaped instead of flat at the base. They also have hairs on the underside of the leaf, which are not present in Japanese knotweed. The next is Bohemian knotweed. This one is actually a hybrid of giant and Japanese knotweed. The leaf bases vary on a single plant from the flat to heart-shaped. That is presented in the flat being in Japanese, heart being in giant. You can see this really well on the picture on the right. It also has the hairs that are present in giant, but they are much shorter. The last and most different knotweed is Himalayan knotweed. This one is not currently found in Michigan, so it would be a big deal if you came across this one. Its leaves are lance-shaped and its flowers are pink instead of white. It also has hairs on underside of the leaf, but they are stiff in comparison to the giant and Bohemian hairs. This is a side-by-side shot of all knotweeds, going from giant to Bohemian to Japanese to Himalayan. This key also points out the reproduction capabilities. Both Bohemian and Japanese rarely produce their seeds, while giant normally does produce seeds. So that does give giant a kind of a reproductive edge in spreading and reproducing. The most common look-alike species for any of the knotweeds is the native species pokeweed, also known as inkweed. The stems of this one are completely purple and they lack the nodes of knotweeds. The leaves are lance-shaped, kind of like the Himalayan knotweed, but pokeweed has these strings of berries that you would not find in any of the knotweeds. One of the hardest things about knotweed is that everyone's first instinct and go-to management techniques always make Japanese knotweed spread farther. So how do you treat Japanese knotweed or any weeds? Do you cut it? No, that will lead to spread. Do you mow it? No, that also leads to spread. Do you burn it? No, that really won't do anything. It will grow back exactly the same. Do you dig it up? No, it has such a massive root system that it would be so complicated to get every single little piece that you would normally end up leading to spread. How about using glyphosate spray? Nope, not that either. In most cases, glyphosate only causes top die-off and the plant grows more aggressively. sometimes just to the side of where it was sprayed, and sometimes exactly where it was sprayed. Do you ignore it? No. It will continue to build strength and continue to spread underground, even if you don't see it spreading above ground, just making management later more difficult. Should you follow best management practices? Of course. There are chemical treatments that have been shown to be effective for Japanese knotweed, but what you go with chemically depends on the site. Is it aquatic? Is it terrestrial? Time of year is a big dependent for which chemical you use. And no matter what chemical you use, the quickest Japanese knotweed has been seen as eliminated was after 3 years of treatment. And again, that was the quickest Japanese knotweed has been effectively managed. Now we're back to quick snapshots. This is spotted knapweed. Every county in the state is covered by a SSMA. How each operates is slightly different, but all have a goal on preventing invasive species spread. So if you are listening to this and you are outside the Barry, Calhoun, Kalamazoo area, there is somebody for you, and you can still contact me and I will get you in contact with the right person. This is known as the invasion curve. It shows the easiest and cheapest way to manage invasive species is to never have them in the first place. So the invasion curve starts with prevention at the bottom left-hand corner and then moves up to monitoring, looking for new species. Or if you find one, eradicate it right away. Next to rapid response. If you find more of it, contain it to certain areas, and then you're on to manage and control, where it is kind of everywhere, but you're making sure it's not spreading to new areas or high quality areas. This is multiflora rose. Prevention techniques include buying firewood where you plan to burn it, so live insects are not transported via cut wood. When planting, choose native species. There have been many cases where a non-native species was recommended and then later found out to be harmful. A big example of this is autumn olive. Decontaminate gear and equipment between sites or trails. Don't release unwanted pets or plants into the wild. And educate on invasives so people know what they have before they manage incorrectly. This is European frogbit. It is an example of why you should not release unwanted plants or animals, because it is a big one in aquarium trade. For new invasive species to the area, the first thing would be to report the infestation to someone like a SSMA representative. In the case of BCK SSMA, we would go out and verify the site and invasive for you for free. We would then discuss best management practices and talk about treatment options. We do have a cost share program for our priority species, which would be new ones or ones, think about the ones we talked longer about today. This is Japanese barberry. It is still very common in landscaping, but it does increase your tick population. For the invasive species that are kind of everywhere now in Michigan, the best thing would still be to determine best management practices. The SSMA, even for those super common invasives, will still do a site visit for free and discuss those recommendations for you. Also, if it's at a park or you have a group together and you want to do a volunteer work day, the SSMA will be happy to assist with that, to be there on hand to just guide the volunteers. This is yellow floating heart. Here is my contact information. I am also available now for questions. Yeah, I think one of my slides I accidentally skipped forward. So the black and pale swallowwort, this leaf, the flowers are star-shaped. I think that's all that was missed. Just me hitting the wrong button. Other than that, are there questions in the chat box already? Or do you want to have people unmute themselves and ask questions directly?
I'll do that.
There we go. No, I think she got it. Can you hear now?
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now.
That particular site at the end of your presentation, can you forward that to Mike Love or sub so it can be spread to the club as a whole?
Which picture did you want?
The site on your final presentation slide.
Oh, with my information and
Yes.
yes, I can have that sent out.
Okay. That would be good for more eyes and, you know, such that I'm glad that it comes in the fall anyway. So, but I haven't seen anything like that. I've been warned about that giant hogwort. I think that was found in Calhoun County twice this year.
Yeah, that one's found. It pops up very infrequently in Michigan, but there's no like set area. Like it's kind of everywhere, just never as dense as some of the other big invasive
Well,
species.
it's the sap that's so dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I have a question for a friend of mine. They live on one of the branches of Portage Creek in southern Kalamazoo County, and they have purple loosestrife, and they were wondering the best way for them to get rid of that.
There is a beetle that eats it. I know that the Kalamazoo Nature Center sells it when they have a good stock of it.
Okay.
This year they did not have a good stock, so I don't know where you would go next. But if they had a very small amount, that one can become dug out if you get all the roots. And it does pull out pretty easily if you dig it out.
Okay.
So if you can't find it, you could dig.
Okay. So they can try digging it out. Now the creek is low, is my understanding. And then they could contact the Kalamazoo Nature Center, and for maybe the future, they might get beetles in like next year. Okay.
Digging it out would remove some of the plants, but the seeds have already been released, so they probably would still see some next year.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Fallon.
Fallon, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. What's the best time of year to remove autumn olive?
If you are doing a foliar spray on the leaves, you should do that while the leaves are growing, but for the best experience closest to fall to get it down to the roots. But if you're doing cut stump, which is really normal for that one too, so to cut off the tops and then dab the stump with just a little bit of chemical, you could do that any time of year, even in the winter.
And just a general question, could you talk to us about garlic mustard?
Yep, definitely is an invasive species. I think must have just got moved off of one of my slides. I sometimes put it on there. It does have a 2-year life cycle. I know a lot of people pull this one. It's very easy to pull, but you have to stay on top of it because of the seed bank. Having 2 years, 1 year is not going to do it.
And what are you now seeing as the newest rapid spreader in our area?
I think the biggest spreaders in our area are the knotweeds and Phragmites, but Michigan has a watch list species, like a watch list for species that they say to look out for. It does include the ones like Asian carp and all of that, but it all depends on what you care about sometimes.
Related to autumn olive, what chemical is used to treat it?
I use triclopyr is the chemical name. So that's not the brand name, that's the actual active ingredient. But a lot of them, if you look in the stores, they'll be under a brush killer as a common name, some type of brush killer. And I would use that for both the dabbing and the foliar spray. I would just use them at different percents for each thing and follow the label for those percents.
Can you clarify for us if there is a map that displays the various invasive species that are reported? And is there a reporting system that we could all engage in?
Yeah, so there is a science app thing, like a stewardship science, so like anybody can use it. It's called the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, or MISIN. Yeah, I can do it again. Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, and then MISIN, and that URL to go to online, like it is an app on your phone and it will do the GPS right away, or you can go online. It is MISIN, so the MISIN, at msu.edu. And on that website, you'll have like you'll have like little quizzes on all these invasive species, and you can look up information about even more invasive species, and then you can find maps of certain ones, or you can find maps by county. So a lot of information, a lot of great ones with MISIN.
Just a note for all of you, I know that Carla with the Garden Club and the library, so whether you registered with either of us, we will send out some of Fallon's contact information and a reminder of what that app was and the website link. So we'll definitely do some follow-up for you if you missed any of those things. Another question, do we have any fast-growing native plants that we can plant that would be beneficial?
For some of them, but most of them, after they've been established, they take over so much that planting another thing before chemical treatment wouldn't do much. So it's really good to put down plant after you've like taken care and treated the invasive plants, then to replant with new native species is a good idea. So then something, invasives love an open land, so yeah, to cover that with a native would be better. So you don't like have knotweed and get rid of it and then all of a sudden have Phragmites. Did that answer that?
Could you tell us a little bit about what your job is like day to day? How does your organization function? And kind of how do we plug into that?
Okay. This time of year, I just do a lot of reporting and education and looking for grants to keep going. But in the spring to into the fall, before the first frost, I'm out treating invasive species. I mentioned, I think at the end, we have a cost share program for invasive species treatments. I do high priority ones are more common, but if we have time, we can get into like the other ones. I say high priority because a lot of people ask about ones like autumn olive. And if I were to say yes to one person, I could be there all summer treating just their house. So I do have to prioritize the higher ones and ones that are harder to treat. A lot of site visits, even the autumn olive, I can go out there and tell people how I would treat it, but I just can't do it myself. That's the most common of my job, but obviously always little stuff here and there too.
That is so amazing to know. I know there was a question about how to treat the autumn olive, and then you said you would do it one way in a certain percentage and one way in another percentage. And it would be amazing to know that someone could contact you and you'd help them assess that and then really give those nuts and bolts plans. That's so helpful. I love this. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't say always exactly. I have to tell you a little bit to follow the label, so I don't get both of us in trouble for you just blindly following me. But we could talk about like what we could look at the label and do that together. Yeah.
Great. I love this question. What's your wildest identification that you've had in our area?
So normally I do work mostly with plants, but there is the red swamp crayfish in the Sunset Lake area, which is Vicksburg. And so that is a huge, big red lobster looking crayfish. And I've been doing a lot of night work with those. So those crayfish are active at night. So to like spear them and trap them has been most beneficial at night. So that one's been crazy to be out there in the dark in a park trying to catch crayfish.
When you say large red lobster, like what does large mean?
So like crayfish are normally like this size, and these ones get like this size. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell on a computer and not see my actual hands, but I guess my phone would be about how big they would get, where like normal crayfish are like half the size. And they're much more aggressive than a normal crayfish. Like I'm scared to put my fingers in the holes and stuff because they burrow.
Interesting. That is all the questions I see in the chat right now. So if there are more, please use that. And if you were hoping to unmute to ask something, that would be okay to do now as well.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I was told that Russian olive could be killed by cutting it down to the ground and then making sure no light ever gets to it. And so I did that. Somebody else cut it for me, and took away the trash. And then I covered it with a heavy, thick layer of newspapers. And then I covered it with rocks to keep the newspapers on it. So we'll see what happens. Well, you know, nothing's shooted out of there yet, but it was just a few weeks ago that I did that. I wondered if you had ever heard that.
So the same kind of, so all woody invasives can kind of be treated the same. So there is a company that makes something called a buckthorn baggie. And they do the same kind of concept. So you cut the buckthorn or any woody invasive and you put this dark plastic bag over top of it to stop the light. Sometimes you will see like out from the stem, you'll still see little shoots trying to keep growing. But if you don't have a whole field of it, I'm sure it could work and be potential.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, not that can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Not that I'm obsessed with garlic mustard, but I have a ton of it. And every spring I'm out there pulling it up. And one of my daughters had some botany courses and she was telling me that there's really specific ways of getting rid of it. So it's like you can't really kill it. It's my understanding. It's like, you don't want the seeds to spread. So try to pull it up before the flowers do that. But, if I don't get the roots, it's back. So I don't know, I was told to put it in a garbage bag and seal it up and send it to the dump. And is that the best way? I mean, somebody told me to not even burn it.
Yeah, for all invasive species that you would pull, so even those like purple loosestrifes that we talked about earlier, anything that you would pull, you can put in a black plastic bag and let it sit there for a few days. So it kind of in the heat, so it kind of kills it off in the black plastic bag. You can mark it with invasive species and take it to a landfill. Like the landfill will take it. I know sometimes landfill has problems with taking plant material, but if you do put invasive species on the bag, they are supposed to take that.
Oh, okay.
You are right to make sure that, I know a lot of people just pull garlic mustard until like no more pulling is allowed, but like till you can't see anymore. But those seed pods are so prolific that, yeah, if those are already out and gone, then you're kind of doing nothing at that point to your life cycle. So even after 1 year of really not seeing anything, you could still see it. Then also it spreads so easily that if you had it before, maybe you just keep on getting the same pathway back and back and back. It's a hard one because it's so easy to pull and you want it to be gone and you do so much work, but then you see it the same the next year.
Yeah,
I understand the
exactly.
frustration.
Yeah.
If you weren't adverse to chemicals, you can spray glyphosate on it.
Yeah, I don't like chemicals. I'd rather dig, at least so far. So
Yeah, I recommend that one too because there's so many other ones that they can't. The chemical is the best option, so I like not recommending chemical for something like garlic mustard.
right, yeah. Well, I know you can eat it, obviously, but I mean, I tried making pesto out of it. I don't know. I did something wrong. So
I haven't ever tried it. I should, but I get that a lot.
Get a good recipe. I mean, it smells great. I love garlic, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to make sure could be all set for next spring.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Fallon, we have several thank yous in the chat, and just to mention that you and your team have made great strides in eradicating Japanese knotweed in one of the attendees' woodland area. So a testimony to your work is in the chat there too.
Oh, thank you. I see that's Bev. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming and listening. And I will get my information out. So if you have more questions after this or further, like longer questions, feel free to email me.
Well, thank you very much, Fallon. We really appreciate it. I have just a quick story about Japanese knotweed. We moved into our house 32 years ago, and this whole hedge of stuff came up that we didn't have a clue. We didn't have a clue what it was. And then it bloomed and there was, a gazillion bees on it. And and nobody at that time seemed to know anything about it. So eventually what my husband and 3 sons did was they dug it out, and the root balls were they were the most humongous things I've ever seen. It was just unbelievable. But we did manage in our ignorance to eradicate it that way.
Yeah, it is a hard one because no matter, it's hard to recommend that because wherever you put that, it could regrow. It's and so massive.
Yeah, and I don't, that's 32 years ago. I don't remember what we did with it, and hopefully we did something that was okay. I'm not sure we did, but like I say, it was unbelievable. It was just really crazy. And I'm sure that people planted it to make a nice hedge.
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is that Mike has a bit of garden club business to conduct this evening. So Fallon, you are more than welcome to stay, as is anyone who dropped in that's not a garden club member. One of the goals is really to get us all connected. So if there's no other questions for Fallon, I think, Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you. And Fallon, that was just a wonderful job. Just learned a lot.